Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Rachael Anderson. Rachael Anderson is a 24-year-old female born on January 28, 1994, in Warren, Ohio, to William Bill Anderson and Patricia Trish Anderson. She has a younger brother named John, who was favored by the family. Rachael graduated from Warren Harding High School in 2012, where she was a member of the National Honor Society and played on the soccer and volleyball teams. From a young age, Rachael aspired to become a funeral director, a unique career choice. She moved on to Youngstown State University, focusing on the study of deceased individuals. Her dedication to her studies earned her recognition as one of the top students, along with a scholarship. Following this, she attended the Cincinnati College of Mortuary Science, graduating in 2016 with a Bachelor of Science degree in Mortuary Science. After joining the Ohio Funeral Directors Association, Rachael relocated to Columbus to start her internship at Shaw Davis Funeral Home. She took her role seriously, believing it was her responsibility to help the families of the deceased. As her internship was nearing its conclusion, Rachael hoped to become a permanent employee at the funeral home. However, her dream was suddenly and tragically shattered. Rachael's body was taken to the morgue, and investigators began interviewing the first witnesses. The autopsy on Rachael revealed the details of the brutal assault she suffered that night. She had been both strangled and stabbed. Specifically, she had a cut on her scalp and fractures at the base of her skull. The stab wound entered through the back of her neck and penetrated the left side of her brain, indicating extreme force that caused a portion of her skull to break off. The autopsy also found that she had been strangled with a cord from an electric blanket. The strangulation caused bleeding in her sternoclavicular muscles and eyelids, and the blood vessels in her eyes had burst, leading to noticeable redness. Forensic evidence revealed bruises and red marks on her ankles and wrists, indicating she was alive when the perpetrator tied her up. A DNA sample was discovered on the rope and Rachael's body. The coroner who conducted Rachael's autopsy determined that her death resulted from a stab wound to the head and neck, despite the initial theory suggesting strangulation. After interviewing various employees from Rachael's workplace and her ex-boyfriend, who had an alibi, the police continued to explore different possibilities regarding the attack. Detectives returned to Rachael's apartment to search for evidence or clues about the perpetrator. On the living room floor, they discovered Rachael's purse, which was missing her wallet. 2 weeks after the crime, Rachael's mother found the 9-inch steak knife used to stab her in a box in her apartment. However, the brutal nature of Rachael's torture suggests that the perpetrator was not simply a thief, but a psychopath who enjoyed abusing his power over his victims. Investigators explored various motives, but initially had no suspects. The details of Rachael's death were kept confidential to protect the investigation. Eventually, DNA samples were collected from different parts of Rachael's body and the crime scene. Unfortunately, these samples did not match any samples in the Special Services database. The video footage from street surveillance cameras captured 2 individuals using Rachael's car to drive around the city after her death. During this period, cash was withdrawn from her debit and credit cards. Location data identified a phone number that was in Rachael's apartment between 7:59 p.m. and 9:25 p.m. on January 28, 2018. Analyzing the evidence revealed the caller's whereabouts at various times. Once the account associated with the phone number was identified, investigators found the suspect, 54-year-old Anthony Pardon. He had a criminal history that included multiple rapes, robbery, kidnapping, and attempted murder. Overall, he served 33 years in prison for his crimes. Anthony had a difficult upbringing. He was initially raised by his grandparents and later moved in with his mother. As a child, he was diagnosed with conduct disorder and antisocial personality disorder. In March 1979, at the age of 14, Anthony was briefly committed to the Ohio Youth Commission. By July of the same year, he was placed under court custody and transferred to Franklin County Children's Services. In December, he was again found guilty of making threats, leading to another transfer to the Ohio Youth Commission, where he was placed in foster care. In 1980, Anthony was charged with abuse, involving his foster parents' 15-year-old son. Then, he informed Columbus police that he committed the crime because he was upset after an argument with his girlfriend. As a result, Anthony was convicted as a juvenile. On November 13, 1981, when Anthony was 16, he visited his girlfriend's 39-year-old mother to use the telephone. During this visit, he threatened her with a butcher knife, assaulted her, and stole $100 from her purse. He tied her hands and feet, gagged her, and placed her in the trunk of his car. He drove to Valleydale, where he untied her feet and threw her into the river behind the Valleydale ballroom. When he noticed that the partially clothed she was able to stay afloat, he entered the creek and held her head underwater. Fortunately, a passerby intervened and scared him away, allowing she to survive. Anthony fled the scene before the police arrived and used the money he had stolen from her to buy tennis shoes and jogging clothes. In May 1982, at the age of 17, he had been convicted of other crimes in Franklin and received a prison sentence ranging from 5 to 25 years. While incarcerated, he committed several rule violations, such as possessing a weapon, setting a mattress on fire, and engaging in fights. He ultimately spent more than 24 years in prison for his offenses and was released in November 2006. After his release, Anthony relocated to Georgia and applied for a job using a different name. In 2007, Anthony was charged with forgery papers and convicted in Floyd County, within a 9-year prison sentence. After serving his time, he received 20 years of probation and were required to wear a GPS ankle monitor. He was released from prison in 2017 and returned to Ohio in June of that year. According to an interstate agreement between Ohio and Georgia, he was supervised by the Adult Parole Authority and had to report to the Sheriff's Department every 90 days. The Ohio Adult Parole Authority did not give him a monitor, as the judge had requested. And Anthony was free once more. On August 21, 2017, he was found with a sex worker in his car, and 6 days later, he was caught driving without a license. During that traffic stop, police discovered he had a kitchen knife and a shotgun, but for some unknown reason, or due to police negligence, he was not arrested. Therefore, he is still continuing to commit crimes. CCTV footage captured Rachael's car parked outside a store. A man exited the passenger side of the car and entered the store. The driver was not visible in the footage. This makes the investigation more difficult than ever. However, after visiting the store and speaking with the employees, the police were able to identify the man. He was named Slits. A few days later, Slits was questioned at the police station. He said an adult man passing by approached him and offered to exchange his ex-girlfriend's card for cash. He agreed to this arrangement, which made him a co-conspirator in the Rachael case. Slits confirmed the identity of Anthony and detailed the entire route they took on the evening of January 28, 2018, while trying to cash in Rachael's stolen cards. The issue at hand was to locate and arrest Anthony. On February 9, 2018, after several days of track at Anthony's sister's house, he was successfully apprehended. The 54-year-old, who had a history of crime, faced 9 charges, including burglary, aggravated robbery, kidnapping, rape, and aggravated murder. The trial commenced on February 4, 2020. On the first day of the trial, 4 witnesses provided their testimonies. Among them was Jonathan, a co-worker of Rachael, who found her body. He, along with the manager of Rachael's apartment complex, shared their accounts. The jury also heard testimony from Officer Frank Scani, who was parked outside the apartment when Jonathan discovered the body Rachel's and reviewed the surveillance footage. On February 5th, Rachel's brother, John, and Special Agent Joshua Durst took the stand. Lead Detective Art Hughes testified the following day, on February 6th. On that same day, Anthony expressed dissatisfaction with his attorneys to the judge and requested new representation. He appeared to be deliberately delaying the proceedings. On Monday, February 10th, the prosecutors called a fingerprint expert and other specialists to explain how technology helped determine where Rachel's debit card was used and at the crime scene. Anthony's sister testified that he gave her Rachel's debit card, claiming it belonged to his girlfriend. She later discovered, through news reports, that the card actually belonged to the crime victim, Rachel. The final day of testimony was Tuesday, February 11th. The medical examiner reported finding Anthony's DNA at the scene, while a forensic pathologist and a deputy coroner from the Franklin County office detailed Rachel's injuries. In the courtroom, the final moments of Rachel's life were carefully reconstructed. She celebrated her 24th birthday on January 26th and 27th, 2018. Her brother, John, traveled from Warren to Columbus to visit her. The following day, she and John went to the home of her friend and colleague, Jonathan, where they held a birthday party for she. After a long night of celebration, Rachel and her brother stayed overnight at their friend's house. The next morning, Rachel left for work, leaving her apartment key with her brother. On the 28th, John returned to his hometown and accidentally brought Rachel's house key with her. At around 1 p.m., Rachel texted John, person holding her house keys, to let him know she would come over to pick it up. Rachel talked to her mother around 6:30 p.m. and then went to John's place to get her key. Since her apartment door could only be locked from the outside with a key, she had to leave it open. After stopping for dinner at her favorite restaurant, Rachel arrived back at her apartment around 7:30 p.m. She then left the apartment, and Anthony was waiting for her outside. He kidnapped Rachel, taking her from the ground floor to the top floor. He used force to pin her down, then tying her legs with a hair dryer cord and her hands with a belt and curtain cord. Once she was unable to move, he wrapped a curling iron cord around her wrists to silence her and gagged her. He forced Rachel to provide him with the PIN numbers for her cards. He tortured her and exploited her vulnerability. Ultimately, he strangled her with a cord from an electric blanket. In addition to strangulation, he also caused blunt force trauma and inflicted a stab wound to her head. Afterward, he concealed her body in a closet, leaving her naked from the waist down with the electric blanket cord around her neck and the door handle. Anthony stole her car and used her bank cards at various stores in Columbus to make quick money. The defense did not present any witnesses. The final hearing took place on February 12. Assistant Prosecutor Amy Van Kullen gave the state's argument, outlining the timeline of the crime and telling the jury that Anthony murdered Rachel in cold blood. In his argument, the defense attorney, Larry Thomas, admitted that Anthony used Rachel's cards but said that he was not responsible for the murder. Attorney Larry argued that the state's case was based on mere speculation. He said that DNA evidence and cell phone data were not enough to prove Anthony's involvement in the crime. The jury, consisting of 4 men and 8 women, spent about 6 hours over 2 days discussing the case, before finding him guilty on all charges. The prosecution sought the death penalty because he killed Rachel during a burglary and he had previously been convicted of the attempted murder of a similar woman. They opted for the death penalty instead of seeking clemency because of his extensive criminal history. Prosecutor O.B. Bryan remarked that some individuals cannot follow the law, and Anthony is one of them. The sentencing phase of the trial started on February 18th. The defense aimed to lessen the severity of the punishment by highlighting Anthony's difficult childhood, but this argument was not effective. Prosecutors contended that the negative factors in the case were more significant than any positive ones. Additionally, it was established during the trial that Anthony understood his actions when he assaulted Rachael. Testimonies in Anthony's defense were given by his mother, sister, a psychologist, and his former elementary school teacher. On February 19, Anthony gave a 13-minute speech before the jury, sharing details about his abusive childhood. He shared the struggles he encountered after his release from prison, expressing feelings of hardship and despair. He claimed that the law system let him down and that he received no support. And he attributed his current situation to the failures of the justice system. However, he neither addressed the crime he committed nor offered any apology in his remarks. On February 20th, after 3.5 hours of deliberation, the jury was unable to reach a consensus on whether to recommend the death penalty. Instead, they decided to recommend life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentencing occurred on March 16, 2020. Rachael's mother cried in court when the verdict was announced. Her father issued a sharing his thoughts on the investigation he had witnessed over the past few years. He was shocked to look a dangerous repeat offender making outrageous demands and acting as if he was entitled to something. He also was astonished to see an adult complaining about the system's shortcomings while trying to evade responsibility. Judge McIntosh sentenced Anthony Pardon to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole, one for aggravated murder and another for violence. Furthermore, he received an additional 63 years for aggravated burglary, kidnapping, aggravated robbery, and several violent offenses. These sentences are to be served one after the other. Rachael's 24th birthday turned into a tragic day. A young woman with a bright future ahead of her had her life unexpectedly cut short. She was finishing up her internship and was on the verge of receiving a promising job offer. Rachael was laid to rest at Pineview Memorial Park, leaving her family and friends struggling to cope with the sudden loss. Every year on January 28, Rachael's family and friends light a candle at home to remember her. Rachael was a lively person with a beautiful smile and a loving heart. She was kind and always willing to help her friends. Throughout her life, she had many interests, but her main focus was her career. Rachael was naturally compassionate, loved dancing, and cherished time spent with family and friends. She had a special love for children and valued her life, which was sadly taken away too soon. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Alicia Ross. Alicia Ross was born on February 8, 1980, in the Canadian city of Markham, in the province of Ontario. There's no information about her biological parents. All that's known is that they gave up their rights over the girl, and she was adopted a few months later by a couple named Marvin and Sharon Ross. Her adoptive parents surrounded her with love and care, doing everything they could to ensure their daughter lacked for nothing and could fully develop her talents. When Alicia started going to school, her adoptive parents decided to get divorced, but they maintained a friendly relationship and continued to support together in their daughter's life. Shortly after, Sharon remarried, and her new husband, named Julius Forrest, treated her as if she were his own daughter. Alicia did well in school, excelled at drawing, and also had a passion for photography, enjoying discovering new cities and countries. After finishing school, she spent a year in Australia, where she traveled and enjoyed life before returning home and enrolling in university. In the summer of 2005, Alicia went on a hiking trip in the mountains with her friends. She enjoyed spending time in nature, away from the busy city life. During the trip, she met a 29-year-old man named Sean, and they started a romantic relationship. The age difference of 4 years did not bother the couple. At the time, Alicia still lived in her adoptive parents' home, occupying the basement with a separate entrance, which allowed her to live independently from her parents. On August 16th, Alicia took a walk in the park with her adoptive mother and their dogs. Alicia seemed happy and shared that she was about to be promoted to the position of senior sales manager at work. She was very proud as she had been working hard for a long time, and her efforts were finally paying off. Additionally, Alicia talked to her mother about her boyfriend, Sean, whom she had been dating for just over a month but she seemed deeply in love with. Alicia hoped that this romance could develop into something more significant in the future and expressed a desire to introduce Sean to her adoptive parents by arranging a family dinner. After a stroll through the park, Sharon headed home, and Alicia went out on a date with her sweetheart, promising not to stay out too late because she had to get up early for work the next day. They said their goodbyes and went their separate ways. After meeting with Sean, Alicia invited him to her house. They had a good time together, and around midnight, he went home. Alicia accompanied him to the door, which served as a second exit from the backyard. They said goodbye with a kiss, and then he left, promising to call her as soon as he got home. Around midnight, as promised, Sean called his girlfriend, but she didn't answer the phone. He wasn't too worried, thinking that Alicia had simply fallen asleep since she had to get up early for work. However, the next morning, when he tried to call her again and she still didn't answer, he genuinely became concerned and contacted a mutual acquaintance who worked in the same office as Alicia. From her, he learned that Alicia had not gone to work, and he immediately rushed to her house. On the morning of August 17th, Sharon and Julius left their home around 10 a.m. to play golf with friends. They noticed their daughter's car in the driveway but assumed a colleague had picked her up, so they didn't think much of it and continued with their plans. About half an hour later, Sean arrived at the Ross residence and, finding no sign of Alicia there, he called the police to report her as a missing person. Sean also immediately contacted Sharon to inform her of the situation. Sharon and Julius rushed home immediately after hearing the news. By the time they arrived, the police were already present at the scene. Sean was the first person to notice the girl's disappearance and inform the authorities. Sean was also the last person to see Alicia alive and well the evening before she vanished. According to Sean, they had said goodbye at the gate where his car was parked around midnight, and she had not been in touch since then. When Sharon and Julius reached the house, law enforcement was already there, investigating the area and speaking with Sean, who had called them. Sean appeared visibly nervous and distraught. When the mother checked Alicia's room, she noticed that all of her daughter's personal belongings were still in their place. Her purse, passport, driver's license, keys, cell phone, bank cards, and cash were all left behind. The gate was open but not forced, suggesting that she either let her abductor in or willingly left the yard with someone. In the backyard, the police found some signs of disturbance. The lawn and flowers in one spot were trampled, as if someone had fallen there. Additionally, a pair of cigarettes and Alicia's right sandal, which she had been wearing the evening before, were found on the ground in a straight line. Neither Alicia nor her parents smoked, and Sean claimed he never smoked that particular brand. Sean was considered the prime suspect almost immediately. At first, he was clearly very nervous and his narration seemed a bit confusing and disjointed. Second, he was the first to report his girlfriend's disappearance to the police, even before speaking with her parents and confirming that they hadn't seen her either. Therefore, he definitely knew she was missing. Moreover, the authorities found biological traces of Sean and her on her bed. Based on this, the investigation speculated that Alicia may have rejected Sean's advances, and he decided to force himself on her, then trying to cover his tracks, and staging her disappearance, which likely resulted in her losing her life. Sean was brought to the police station and questioned. The investigator presented their theory to him, which left the young man stunned. He was dismayed to be the prime suspect and swore he would never harm his girlfriend, as he loved her. Sean admitted they had intimate moments that evening, but insisted it was consensual. Her parents had nothing bad to say about Sean. He hadn't argued with their daughter, hadn't mistreated her, and she spoke only well of him. Their relationship was progressing rapidly and quite happily, and Alicia even hoped to have a future with him. It's understandable that the parents are deeply concerned about their daughter's disappearance. The facts known so far suggest that she had no plans or reasons to leave her apartment. She was looking forward to a promotion at her workplace, and as a responsible person, it's unlikely she would have just abandoned everything. Even if there had been unforeseen circumstances, she would have surely informed her parents and taken her documents, money, and phone with her. The police couldn't find sufficient evidence to arrest Sean, so he was released after questioning. However, the investigators haven't completely ruled out Sean as a suspect and are continuing to monitor him. Sean himself seemed depressed and very disturbed. An intensive search for Alicia began the day after she went missing. Initially, a thorough inspection of the house and yard was conducted. Investigators examined the surrounding area in detail and interviewed neighbors. However, no one reported having heard or seen anything suspicious that night. The authorities theorized that the woman disappeared sometime between midnight, when she said goodbye to Sean, and dawn, a time when the streets are usually quiet and deserted, making it difficult to find witnesses. Flyers with Alicia's photos were distributed throughout the city, listing the phone numbers where people could provide any information about her whereabouts. The search for Alicia became one of the most extensive operations in the history of Ontario. Every rugged terrain, ravine, and swampy area were examined, but no clues, leads, or even suggestions about the whereabouts of the missing woman were found. Her parents also appealed to the public through the media, expressing their belief that their daughter was still alive but was being held against her will somewhere. They implored whoever had their daughter to let her return home unharmed and not to do her any harm. The police leaned towards the theory that someone Alicia knew personally had kidnapped her and possibly ended her life. This hypothesis was supported by the lack of signs of struggle, the absence of evidence of entry, and the fact that the door had been left open, but no concrete clues were found. The cigarette found on the floor had only a very smudged fingerprint that could not be identified. Investigators thoroughly reviewed Alicia's contacts and analyzed all calls and messages from her phone and email, but nothing suspicious was uncovered. On the 6th day of the search, the case was officially classified as a criminal offense, even though there was a lack of evidence, and Sean remained the main suspect. Sean lived alone in his own house about 10 miles from Alicia's house. After realizing that public suspicion had increased following his media appearance, he no longer participated in the search and refused to speak to the press. The investigators questioned Sean 3 more times, but his story remained consistent. He was then offered a lie detector test, which he refused, further convincing the police that he was involved in the crime. 2 weeks after the disappearance, Sean was arrested on an unrelated charge. He was pulled over late at night for driving under the influence and resisting arrest. Speculation arose that he was drowning his guilt in alcohol. After Sean's arrest, Alicia's parents gave another interview, sharing that they had not met him personally and only knew of him through their daughter's stories. They believed she was happy, but now Sharon considered the possibility that she may have withheld certain details to avoid upsetting them, despite having planned to introduce her boyfriend to her family soon. The police interviewed Sean's neighbors to determine if they had noticed anything unusual recently, such as him disposing of large trash bags, behaving suspiciously, leaving unexpectedly, or washing his car. However, these investigations did not yield any significant information. The detectives were left hoping that Sean would eventually confess everything. About a month after Alicia's disappearance, there was an unexpected development in the case. The initial media attention surrounding her case began to wane, and the search efforts continued but were no longer prominently featured in news reports. The investigation appeared to have reached a dead end. Then, on September 20th, 2005, more than a month after Alicia went missing, a completely unexpected twist occurred. A 31-year-old local resident named Daniel contacted the police and confessed to ending Alicia's life, providing the location where he had hidden her body. It's important to note that this man was never under suspicion, and the police had not considered him at all during their investigation. Initially, it seemed that the man simply craved fame and attention, and therefore decided to take responsibility for the most notorious case in recent years. However, all doubts were dispelled when the police found her body in the location he had indicated. Before delving into who this new person of interest was, let's examine why the police had not shown any interest in him previously. Daniel was an unemployed inmate who lived in his mother's house, which was adjacent to the Alicia family's home. Their house were separated by unkempt shrubs, forming an almost impenetrable barrier. Although the criminal and the victim had lived practically their entire lives right next to each other, they had never interacted before. Alicia had observed Daniel behaving in an unusual manner on his house, leading her to believe he might be mentally unwell. Daniel had experienced significant socialization issues from a young age. He lacked friends, was mocked at school, and all his attempts to form relationships were unsuccessful, causing him to develop a deep resentment towards women. As a child, girls had rejected him, calling him a loser and refusing to associate with him. At the age of 8, Daniel was diagnosed with a socializing behavioral disorder and had been receiving ongoing psychological treatment. Although therapy did not significantly improve his condition, during his teenage years, he confessed to having fantasies of suddenly attacking and overpowering a girl, which excited him. However, specialists remained confident that these fantasies would remain within his imagination. After finishing school, Daniel stopped attending therapy sessions and decided not to continue his education. He became a recluse, living in his mother's house and isolating himself from the outside world. Daniel spent most of his days in his room, often visiting adult websites. Occasionally, he would venture out in the evenings to secretly observe his neighbors, peeping into their windows. He seemed particularly interested in watching when someone was engaged in intimate activities, which excited him. Daniel initially claimed that Alicia's death was accidental and he hid the body to avoid punishment. He said that when he realized she showed no signs of life, he placed her body in the trunk of his mother's car and drove about 50 miles out of town, hiding it in a bushy ravine by the side of a country road. 3 weeks later, fearing the body would be discovered, he moved it in the middle of the night to a deserted area. The body was found in the place Daniel indicated, confirming Daniel's guilt. The condition of the remains suggested the girl had been treated with extreme cruelty. Alicia seemed to have been hit by a vehicle. The forensic examination revealed that she had almost all of her ribs broken, her neck and both arms fractured, and extensive closed head trauma with internal bleeding. The exact cause of death could not be determined. The forensic experts were surprised, as they had never seen anything like it before. It was necessary to clarify all the circumstances and the timeline of events that fateful night to precisely determine how Alicia suffered such injuries. Initially, the convicted man claimed he had had an argument with his neighbor on a path covered in bushes between their houses. At some point during the verbal altercation, she called him a loser, which angered him, and he struck her in the head. When she fell, he kicked her several times in the chest. When he realized she wasn't breathing, he decided to hide the body and then moved it again when the search area expanded. However, there was something in his story that didn't add up. There were missing details and specifics. For example, it wasn't clear what Daniel was doing at his neighbor's house at night, why they started arguing, what caused such a brutal beating, and why the evidence found at the scene was arranged in a straight line. Restoring the full picture of events was challenging, but law enforcement managed to do so. That evening, Daniel went to spy on his neighbors. He noticed that Alicia's boyfriend had come over, so he approached their house closely. As the couple was being intimate, he watched them from a window. Then he moved back to the bushes but did not leave. Closer to midnight, the lovers went outside and kissed by the gate, just a couple of feet away from the lurking neighbor. When Sean left, the girl returned to the yard and noticed Daniel. She became very angry, realizing that he had been spying on her and her boyfriend all this time. She started yelling at him, calling him a pervert, and demanded that he leave immediately. Finally, Alicia called him a loser, after which she turned around and was about to go back into the house. This is a very disturbing and violent incident. The victim was subjected to a brutal physical assault, with the perpetrator striking her numerous times in the head, neck, chest, and back, causing extensive injuries and internal bleeding. After realizing the victim had died, the perpetrator moved the body to his garage, stripped her naked, and masturbated. He then placed the corpse in the trunk of his mother's car and transported it to a remote location outside the city. This sequence of events indicates a severe lack of empathy and disregard for human life. The language used is graphic and unsettling, but necessary to convey the gravity of the situation. Upon returning to his home, the criminal took a shower, changed his clothes, and behaved as if nothing had happened. His clothes, as well as the personal belongings of the victim and the towels he used to clean the crime scene, were bagged and disposed of. The trial and sentencing only began in April 2007, when new details were made public. The accused confessed to having taken the life of his neighbor, but he and his lawyer insisted that it was an involuntary act. Additionally, the defense requested a psychiatric evaluation, indicating that Daniel was ill and should not be considered responsible for his actions, suggesting that he should be treated in a clinic rather than incarcerated. However, the prosecution argued that, despite his mental illness and issues with anger management, Daniel acted with full awareness of the consequences of his actions. He ruthlessly kicked Alicia with all his might, knowing that this would likely result in her death. Nevertheless, the court-ordered psychiatric evaluation confirmed that the accused could be fully responsible for his actions. Regarding the items found in the backyard, Daniel never admitted to having placed them in a straight line. On May 7, 2007, Daniel Sylvester was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 16 years. A year later, Canadian singer-songwriter Kathleen Edwards wrote a song titled Alicia Ross, which portrayed the events from the perspective of Alicia during the final moments of her life. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of April Jones. On October 1, 2012, April Jones, 5, was playing outside her home in the Bryn Aeg housing estate in West Wales. It was around 7 p.m. Normally, April's parents wouldn't let her play outside so late, but she had received excellent grades the day before, so they gave her more time to play. April played outside with her friends for about 20 minutes before heading home. However, she did not return home at 7 p.m., as scheduled. Her parents last saw her riding her bike and immediately began searching for her. They soon found her 7-year-old friend not far away, but April was nowhere to be found. April's friend told them that April had gotten into a car with a man wearing a green jacket, with blue eyes, brown hair, and a beard. A key detail was revealed by the young child, who showed intelligence beyond her years. She reported that April had gotten into the car on the driver's side. However, as the steering wheel is usually on the right in British cars, this would suggest that the car in question had a left-hand drive. Despite the time of night, the police were quick, arriving on the scene just 8 minutes after the 999 call was made. As search teams gathered, police interviewed anyone who knew April to gather information about her disappearance and to see if anything unusual had happened in the days leading up to her disappearance. They tried to piece together the events surrounding her disappearance. The family could not think of any information that would assist the police in their search. April had attended swimming lessons earlier that day and was allowed to play outside with friends when she returned home. However, April had only been missing for a short time, but it was late fall and it would soon be dark, making it very difficult to find her. News of the incident spread quickly through the neighborhood through word of mouth and social media. Hundreds of locals rushed out of their homes to help in any way they could. Despite their good intentions, this actually made the police's job more difficult. While they were grateful for the community's support, they still had to go door to door to find out if anyone had seen April or who might have kidnapped her. The problem was, with so many people out trying to help, most of the houses were empty, making it difficult for the police to gather information and conduct their investigation. The story quickly gained widespread national attention and attracted television crews and reporters from across the country to the small town. Police provided a 10:30 update to the public and media, expressing concern that they had still not found any evidence or leads of April. Police urged anyone who may have seen or known anything about April's disappearance to come forward immediately. April Jones was born on April 4, 2007. Despite a happy childhood, April faced a number of health problems in her early years due to being born 7 weeks premature. However, with medical care, she was able to overcome most of these problems and have a normal childhood. One condition that April has not overcome is cerebral palsy, a brain disorder caused by trauma during or shortly after birth, usually due to lack of oxygen to the brain. The condition affects April from the waist down. Fortunately, it is not too serious. However, the condition causes pain and difficulty with simple muscle movements. Even with a mild condition, she still needs careful care. The most worrying thing is that her kidnapper may not know about her small defect, which may not be important to them. On the evening of October 1st, the police released more details about April's disappearance. Specifically, she was last seen wearing a school polo shirt and purple jacket. More than 100 people, including local residents and volunteers from the UK, have gathered to assist the police in the search. Locals who are familiar with the area may be very helpful in locating her. Others have traveled from South Wales to assist, showing their desire to help find April. The search area near the town was vast and dangerous, spanning 60 square kilometers of mountains, waterfalls, gorges, dense forests and uneven terrain. Severe weather conditions, including heavy rain and overcast skies, made the search even more difficult. To ensure their safety, police carefully organized volunteers into several search teams. For 8 hours, teams braved the weather and traversed the difficult Welsh countryside to find April. The outpouring of support from the volunteers was a testament to the compassion of the community and brought some comfort to April's family as they anxiously waited by the phone for news. Police initially banned the family from participating in the search, fearing they would be fined. As the situation became more desperate, with April still missing, the police issued a child rescue alert on October 2, 2012. This alert allowed the police to share vital details about April and her abductor with all UK police agencies. As a result, the entire nation learned of the case for the first time. 14 hours after April went missing, the media put enormous pressure on the police. They also raised questions about the police's handling of the investigation. It could be argued that the criticism of the police was unfair. Despite the harsh weather conditions, the police quickly organized search parties and searched for April throughout the night. Considering the circumstances, it is unlikely that they could have done more that night. After Inspector Andy John took over the investigation, he provided the public and the media with regular updates. He also erected barricades and directed officers to set up checkpoints. During the investigation, posters with April's picture were distributed in the hope that someone would come forward with information. Police received numerous reports from local residents and people in the surrounding areas. In reviewing these reports, one name was mentioned repeatedly: Mark Bridger. Several witnesses identified a local man named Mark as a potential suspect. He was known to drive a Land Rover, had blue eyes, and a short beard. He was also notably left-hand drive. Several witnesses reported seeing Mark or his vehicle in the area at the time of April's disappearance. Police tracked down Mark's last known address and made numerous attempts to contact him, but neither he nor April were found there. Mark notably had no criminal record. Although some residents claimed to have seen Mark during the first night search for April, it was difficult to confirm due to the large number of volunteers involved. Currently, the police are focused on locating him. Helicopters circled the area as police conducted a thorough search of all possible locations where he could have been. They learned that Mark had recently moved into a new house called Mount Pleasant. There was no sign of life to the police when they arrived. The house did not have any cars. They entered the house and called April's name, but she did not respond. At that time, it was unclear whether Mark had been hiding from the police. However, at 4:30 a.m., they issued a statement announcing his arrest. A police plane spotted him walking with his dog along a country road, not far from April's family home. He appeared to have tried to change his appearance by cutting his hair and shaving his beard. The helicopter guided the police patrol car to his location. When the police stopped him, the officers asked him his name, and he answered truthfully, without hesitation. They then asked, "Where is she?" Mark responded by explaining what had happened, saying, "It was an accident. I accidentally hit her with my car, and I don't know where she is." They then took him to the nearest police station in Aberystwyth. Meanwhile, in April's hometown, an extensive search operation was underway. Police units, K9 search teams, volunteers, and mountain rescuers scoured the Welsh countryside, searching every area thoroughly. Despite their tireless efforts and determination, April remained missing. Along with a hardworking, determined team of emergency services, hundreds of volunteers from across the country stayed up all night, slept for a few hours, and then resumed the search. The police received a huge response to their appeal for help, with over 600 people offering their support and suggesting potential search locations. This allowed the police to deploy a large team of volunteers who, with their local knowledge, were able to meticulously search over 20 separate areas. While the public can sometimes inadvertently hinder an investigation, local expertise is essential in remote locations like this, and the police need all the support they can get. At this point, the police have arrested Mark Bridger and are questioning him. During questioning, Mark admitted that he had been drinking and was in the area at the time of the incident. He saw two girls riding bicycles and remembered a dark-haired girl passing behind him. Mark admitted that he hit April with his car while he was intoxicated. Mark claimed that he never meant to hurt April, although he admitted that he knew he had made a mistake. According to him, he put her in his car because he believed she needed immediate hospital care. But when Mark saw, her lips turned purple. He realized that his actions had led to April's death. Mark even claimed to be friends with her parents. Although he was initially cooperative, his memory suddenly began to fail. He could not remember anything about what he had done to April's body. Although the police attempted to question him, Mark insisted that he had amnesia and could not provide any further information. The police intensified the interrogation and pressured Mark. It was clear that he was not being truthful. As a result, the police began to doubt whether April was really dead. The police decided to have Mark recount the events that happened the previous Tuesday, the day he was arrested. And they planned to use this opportunity to extract more information from him. When questioned, Mark said that after getting out of the car, he saw April underneath, which made him think that he had run over her. However, the police received information from a 7-year-old child who was with April. She said that April was fine and had voluntarily gotten into Mark's car. April even smiled. This information contradicted his testimony. Mark changed his tone, saying that he did not know that the police had a young witness who had witnessed the entire incident. However, this witness's testimony contradicted Mark's account, making him clearly upset. Despite his emotional state, Mark continued to stand his ground against various interrogation techniques. His testimony remained the same, and nothing changed. The police consulted Dr. Joe Sullivan, a leading expert on body language and criminal behavior. To gain a deeper understanding of the suspect and create an accurate psychological profile, Dr. Joe not only observed Mark's interviews but also visited his home. This thorough examination revealed surprising insights. Mark had an arsenal of knives, handcuffs, and handguns in his home, some hidden and others openly displayed. Dr. Joe described Mark as a daydreamer with a distorted view of reality, imagining himself as a Rambo-like character. This meant that he had difficulty separating his daydreams from the real world. However, Mark disagreed with Dr. Joe's assessment. Mark would not change his story now. Their only chance was for forensic experts to thoroughly search Mark's home. The search found small traces of blood in the bathroom, possibly from Mark bleeding while shaving. Police sent blood samples to the lab for analysis, a process that could take up to 24 hours to get results. Dr. Joe informed the police of his assessment of Mark. He was unlikely to feel empathy or guilt for his actions. He would therefore not respond to appeals to conscience or feel remorse. Therefore, the police should not expect Mark to show remorse, sympathy, or guilt when answering their questions. The police took Dr. Joe's advice to heart. After the police discovered sensitive and disturbing images of children on his laptop, Mark was immediately arrested. As a result, Mark began to suspect that the police knew more than they were letting on. 3 days after April went missing on Monday night, her parents received heartbreaking news on Thursday. The police had given up hope of finding April alive. With heavy hearts, her parents had to tell their children that the search for April was no longer a rescue mission but a murder investigation. And the family would have to accept the loss of their little sister. Meanwhile, the police had instructed the volunteers who had been searching for April to return home and let the professionals handle the situation. This decision was met with strong opposition from the volunteers who did not want to give up. Hundreds of volunteers, exhausted and frustrated, left the search site after finding nothing. On the 4th day of April's disappearance, police search teams combed the area for clues. According to forensic investigators, there was no evidence that Mark had killed April. And, importantly, there was not a shred of evidence that Mark's story was true. An examination of Mark's Land Rover revealed no signs of damage, no blood, no hair, and no skin. There was no evidence of injury to April. According to Mark's testimony, there should have been signs of injury to April, such as scratches on the vehicle or blood inside, but none were found. Mark attempted to downplay his involvement by claiming that he did not see any blood on April after her collision with his car. He asserted that despite being run over, she did not appear to have any visible open wounds. The lab then contacted the police on Friday at 6:15 p.m. with crucial evidence. They had compared DNA from April's toothbrush to blood found in Mark's bathroom, confirming that it was April's blood. Additionally, the collar of Mark's fleece jacket and jogging pants, which he had been wearing, also contained April's DNA. When police questioned him, the photos were discovered on his laptop. Mark claimed that he did not find the content attractive. Mark was shown photos depicting the exploitation and manipulation of minors in a sexually explicit manner. When confronted with his internet search history, Mark denied looking for illegal sites for personal gratification. By Saturday, Mark had been detained for 3.5 days. Police had a total of 96 hours to question him. As the time limit for questioning him was running out, the case was transferred to the Crown Prosecution Service, which will decide whether to proceed with prosecution. Police questioned Mark several times about the disturbing images found on his laptop. As the investigation continued, they struggled to find new ways to persuade him to reveal the truth. When asked if he wanted children, Mark replied that he did not want to be a father. The police then asked, "Did you masturbate to these pictures?" Mark denied it. Mark initially remained calm, but his demeanor began to collapse as the conversation progressed. He flew into a rage and began swearing, clearly upset that someone had suggested he was a pedophile. The case was then referred to the Crown Prosecution Service for further action. The Crown Prosecution Service eventually allowed the police to charge Mark Bridger with the abduction and murder of April Jones, just over an hour after Mark's final interview. When the charges were read to him, Mark showed no emotion or remorse. Over the next 2 weeks, forensic investigators searched Mark's home and found traces of blood that belonged to April. The fireplace was also searched, where a number of badly decomposed bones were discovered. However, due to their poor condition, it was not possible to determine for certain whether the bones belonged to April. A jury found Mark Bridger, 47, guilty on May 30, 2013, for the kidnapping and murder of April Jones. Sentenced Mark Bridger to life in prison without parole. After the trial, April Jones' body was never found. Although 17 bone fragments were discovered in Mark's home, none of them could be positively identified as April's. April Jones' death has left a permanent void in her family's hearts that will never be filled. While her family and friends are working to rebuild their lives, the pain of their loss will continue. A funeral was held in April's hometown on April 26, 2013. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Dawn Hatcheney. Dawn Hatcheney was born on December 5, 1969, in Seattle, Washington. Her parents are Donald Tihara and Diana Parle. Her father, Donald, worked at a shipyard, and her mother, Diana, ran the household. Dawn is the oldest child and only daughter, with 3 younger brothers, Dennis, Darren, and Derek. Her family lives in Bremerton, Washington. According to her mother Diana, Dawn showed her religious devotion from an early age, embracing her faith and accepting God into her life when she was 4 years old. Dawn's childhood was difficult, however. Her parents suffered from anxiety and depression, leading to frequent conflicts at home. Despite these challenges in her childhood, Dawn did well in school, promising herself to get good grades. At age 12, she entered the Scripps National Spelling Bee, an experience that not only led her to the White House but also gave her the opportunity to meet the late President Ronald Reagan. Dawn graduated from Bremerton Christian School as valedictorian in 1988 before attending Northwest College of the Church of God in Seattle. While in college, Dawn met Nick Hatchey and they quickly formed a strong bond. However, her friends were concerned when she started calling him the one after only a few dates. They wanted Dawn to find someone who would truly care for and support her, but they worried that Nick was too aggressive and self-assured, which didn't seem to fit Dawn's personality. Interestingly, Nick's upbringing has some similarities to Dawn's. Nick was born and raised in Poulsbo, a coastal city in Washington. His family life was difficult from an early age. His father, Dan, was constantly immersed in his work as a mechanic, always distant when at home, neglecting his time and responsibilities for the family. His mother, Sandra, ran a daycare in the home and provided foster care, but Nick felt abandoned. He often confided in friends that he felt less loved than his siblings and even his foster children, and that his mother's affection for him was distasteful. Life was difficult with a depressed mother and a father who often neglected the family. Nick felt abandoned and emotionally isolated. Despite this, he found comfort in the Bible and became deeply involved in Christianity. His faith gave him confidence throughout his adolescence. Nick and Dawn first met in college. At first, Dawn's friends were confused by her interest in Nick, whose personality was the complete opposite of hers. Over time, they noticed a significant change in Dawn's behavior. Normally, she was confident, outgoing, independent, motivated, and always striving to achieve new goals. However, when she was with Nick, her personality changed dramatically. She became shy, introverted, and indecisive, often putting Nick's interests above her own, even when they made her feel uncomfortable. It seemed that Nick's influence brought out the worst in her, rather than the best. Despite this, their love continued to grow and their relationship remained strong. In 1990, Nick proposed to Dawn on Alki Beach and they became engaged. They married on April 20th, 1991, and then moved back to Bremerton. By this time, both Dawn and Nick had completed their education. Dawn began working as a loan officer, and Nick began his work as a youth pastor at Christ Community Church on Bainbridge Island, near Seattle. Nick had a desire to become a youth pastor, specifically targeting Christ Community Church due to his relationship with his former youth pastor, Bob, also known as P.B. Smith. At the time, P.B. Smith remained at the church, having overseen the church's affairs since the late 1980s, but now partnered with Pastor Robert Billy Craig to lead the congregation. P.B. Smith took a more friendly but conservative approach to church leadership, while Pastor Robert was known for his strict teachings. In their marriage, Nick made decisions without his wife Dawn, largely because they adhered to the principles of Christian fundamentalism. These principles dictate that the wife submit to the authority of her husband, which Nick and Dawn believed was in line with God's plan. At Christ Community Church, this ideology was clearly promoted and considered acceptable. The church even performed exorcisms for its members, encouraged large families as a divine mandate, and advocated homeschooling for children. Modesty in women was emphasized and questions about sexuality were taboo. Those who disagreed with these norms risked expulsion from the church, creating a climate of silence among dissenters for fear of expulsion. Dawn and her congregation are mired in what many call a cult, with her husband, Nick, playing a key role in these dangerous activities. Initially, Nick admires P.B. Smith, but he soon becomes dissatisfied with P.B. Smith's laid-back approach and feels he has not learned enough. He turns his admiration to Pastor Robert, who has a more extreme and strict approach. Nick seeks direct advice from Robert, distancing himself from his close relationship with P.B. Smith. In contrast, Pastor Robert sees Nick as an opportunity to advance his own agenda. He wants to remove P.B. Smith from his position as senior pastor and take control of the church. Robert's intentions are not sincere and he uses Nick to achieve his own goals. Meanwhile, Nick and his wife Dawn are facing challenges in their personal lives. They are constantly moving from house to house, renovating properties to sell. Dawn grew tired of this lifestyle and longed to settle down in a permanent home. By 1997, these issues were causing tension in their relationship. Nick found a house in need of repair in East Bremerton, planning to move in, renovate, and make it their home. However, the purchase, renovation, and home business plunged the couple into debt. Although their relationship seemed perfect, with Dawn seemingly a supportive wife who agreed with Nick's plans, there were underlying issues that were not immediately apparent. At the same time, Nick was getting into more debt by frequently lending money to people in their church. Nick embarked on his ambitious project of establishing a Christian youth camp. Despite financial difficulties, his passion for the project kept him going. He searched for the perfect location in Jefferson County, confident that he would find the ideal location. His determination intensified when a congregant, a woman named Sandy Glass, asserted receiving a divine vision affirming that the property Nick had his eye on was destined to become the site of the youth camp he envisioned. Sandy Glass, then in her early 20s, had faced hardships in her life. She had lost her first boyfriend to illness and her father in a construction accident. Her brother was addicted to drugs. Sandy was married to Jimmy, a carpenter, and they were struggling financially. A stay-at-home mother, Sandy depended on Jimmy's income, but her tendency to overspend often led to arguments between them. These disagreements sometimes caused Jimmy to scream or retreat, spending hours at the bar venting his frustrations. To resolve their marital problems, the couple sought help from the church and began attending marriage counseling sessions led by Nick, who had been the church's marriage counselor for many years. However, many parishioners filed complaints with Robert about Nick's counseling style, feeling uncomfortable with the way he prioritized intimate and often sexual topics over other important issues. Because of their trust in P.B. Smith, who was still affiliated with the church, members felt that Nick would not have been entrusted with the role if he were not trustworthy. However, in the fall of 1997, Pastor Robert took over as senior pastor, a move that was fully supported by the church council, replacing P.B. Smith. P.B. Smith and his wife then left to do missionary work in Africa. Jimmy's parents, who were also churchgoers, considered Sandy and Jimmy's decision to seek church intervention to be a hasty one. They even questioned Nick's qualifications and experience in guiding their son's marriage. Their concerns grew when they noticed that Nick focused a lot of his attention on Sandy, rather than Sandy and Jimmy as a couple. This attention was not limited to counseling sessions. Nick and Sandy spent a lot of time talking on the phone and meeting outside of church. Jimmy's parents felt that the relationship between Nick and Sandy was unacceptable. They spent a lot of time together and seemed closer than a normal counselor and client should be. Pastor Robert's wife, Pamela, also noticed Nick's behavior and spoke to him privately about it. She told him that he needed to focus on his marriage and that his actions were inappropriate. After much complaining, Pastor Robert stepped in and told Sandy that her relationship with Nick was not working and needed to end. Sandy was angry with Pastor Robert's advice because she believed that she and Nick had a special relationship with God. She wrote him a letter saying that his judgment made it difficult for her to think that he believed in her ability to listen to God and help others. The relationship between Sandy and Nick had a negative impact on those around them. Dawn and Jimmy, as well as Jimmy's children from his previous marriage to Sandy, felt hurt and betrayed. One of the children even told Jimmy that Nick and Sandy had discussed Nick becoming their new father after Jimmy's death. Dawn began sharing with friends at church about her financial difficulties and her desire to have children, a desire that Nick strongly opposed. As 1997 drew to a close, Nick had relationships with several women in addition to Sandy. He engaged in private conversations and lengthy phone calls with these women. At the same time, Sandy's alleged visions grew stronger, prompting Nick to prioritize the establishment of her youth camp and devote more time to their relationship, as she believed they were destined to be together. On the contrary, Dawn made a lot of effort to rekindle Nick's happiness with her, even trying to lose weight. Some of the women in the congregation supported her, telling her that the problems in their relationship were not her fault, but Nick's own. Unfortunately, Dawn's life with Nick did not turn out as she had hoped when they got married. When Christmas came, Dawn woke up feeling unwell with a cold. Despite being sick, she and Nick spent the day with their family. That evening, they visited P.B. Smith's house and spent time with his family. Nick had plans to go hunting with Lindsay, P.B. Smith's daughter, and her friends the next morning, the 26th. Nick met his friends at the Hood Canal Bridge in Jefferson County to go hunting just before dawn. They spent a few hours in the woods without shooting anything and decided to leave. Around 9 a.m., they went to a local diner for breakfast. While eating, Nick suddenly stood up, looking worried, and said, "Dawn and I haven't opened our Christmas presents yet." He left the diner at 9:30 a.m. and arrived home at 10 a.m. to find his wife dead in a fire. When police arrived on the scene, they discovered that the fire had initially started in the bedroom, due to a malfunctioning space heater. The fire quickly spread due to newspapers and wrapping paper in the room, and was made worse by multiple propane tanks on the floor. Nick told friends at the diner that he and his family had not opened their Christmas presents. But he told police a different story. According to Nick, they had actually opened their presents the night before. He said that Dawn had gone to bed feeling unwell and left the wrapping paper scattered around. Nick also confirmed that he had received a propane tank as a Christmas present. The couple was in the process of renovating their home and had used the heater to stay warm during the winter. However, these old fireplaces were not as safe as modern ones and often caused fires and deaths. The police found no inconsistencies in Nick's story. As a local pastor, Nick's status in the community gave the police no reason to suspect anything else. And his wife's death, which was ruled an accident. The congregation was concerned for Nick's health and wanted to support him during this difficult time. Pastor Robert even offered to try to revive Dawn through prayer, but Nick refused, saying he did not want her to suffer any potential pain. This refusal surprised Robert, as Nick had previously been willing to participate in church activities, including the exorcisms they had performed. Mary Glass, Sandy's mother-in-law, immediately suspected Nick of being involved in Dawn's death. Convinced that it was no accident, she urged her husband to report the situation to the police, but this never happened. Soon after, the police officially declared Dawn's death an accident and referred the case to Nick's insurance company. Nick began the process of collecting on Dawn's life insurance, which raised some suspicions from family and friends. They thought it was unusual for Nick to settle the insurance so quickly after Dawn's death, but they understood that the couple had significant debt and that Nick needed the money to pursue his plans for the youth camp. Some church members found Nick's way of grieving unusual, but they refrained from expressing concern, believing that everyone deals with grief differently. The church community came together to remember Dawn's life at her funeral. Family and friends shared stories and remembered her life. Although everyone was sad, Nick remained calm throughout and even gave a 45-minute speech in Dawn's honor. When friends helped him clean out his house, they found several photos of Dawn hidden in the back of a closet, making it seem as though he wanted to throw them away. After that, Nick's behavior became increasingly harsh and insensitive, not only toward some church members but also toward neighbors and friends. He had many romantic relationships with women in the congregation. In a shocking turn of events, Nick began an intimate relationship with Diana, Dawn's mother, under the guise of grief over his widowhood. His actions became too much for Pastor Robert to bear, and Nick was asked to leave Christ Community Church. This eviction had a significant impact on Nick, marking the beginning of his growing troubles. On April 10, 2001, Sandy and her attorney met with the district attorney. The district attorney offered Sandy immunity in exchange for her testimony about a secret she had kept since December 26, 1997. According to Sandy, on the morning of Dawn's death, Nick called her and said, "I did it." However, their conversation was abruptly interrupted by another incoming call on Sandy's phone, leaving Nick waiting to answer the call from someone at the church who had informed him of Dawn's case. After the second call ended, Sandy returned to the conversation with Nick and asked him to clarify what he meant. Nick simply repeated, "It's over, it's over." Sandy did not ask for further details about the call for several weeks. Eventually, Sandy confronted Nick, who confessed to giving Dawn an overdose of Benadryl and then suffocating her by placing a plastic bag over her face. Tragically, Dawn was still partially conscious and aware of what her husband was doing as she suffocated. After she died, Nick carefully placed old newspapers and wrapping paper around the room, including under her body, and placed propane tanks near the bed. He then turned on the heater to burn and start the fire, in an attempt to destroy any evidence of the crime and make it look like an accident. Dawn's autopsy revealed no soot or carbon monoxide in her lungs or blood. The pathologist who examined Dawn ruled her death an accidental fire. They missed crucial evidence of carbon monoxide binding to red blood cells, suggesting that she had not been breathing during the fire. Despite having 5 times the normal amount of Benadryl in her system, the pathologist concluded that the amount was not enough to cause respiratory failure, arguing that even if Dawn had been drowsy, she would have reacted to the increased temperature. Notably, crime scene photos showed newspapers under Dawn's body, a disturbing detail that was largely overlooked. A fire marshal became suspicious and spoke to the police, but he had no authority to decide whether Dawn's death was accidental. Nick was arrested on September 12, 2001, in the Kinko's parking lot. He adamantly denied any involvement in Dawn's death and claimed the church was trying to frame him. Despite his claims that church members could cause serious harm, Nick was charged with first-degree murder and his bail was set at $750,000. Sandy's account, when relayed to the police, added to the frustration. Over the nearly 4-year delay in considering Nick a suspect or making an arrest. And her reason for cooperating, stemming from anger over Nick's relationships with other women in the church. Church members reported Nick's strange behavior and inappropriate relationships when questioned. They were also upset that he did not buy a tombstone for Dawn after receiving the life insurance payout. On September 17, 2001, Nick pleaded not guilty in court. He claimed that the church had cursed him and that Pastor Robert had a dark influence beyond the understanding of the police. When Nick's trial began, Nick Hatcheny was charged with aggravated first-degree murder, which carries a sentence of life in prison without parole. Witnesses, including women who were involved with Nick and church members who had been counseled by him, shared their testimonies with the jury. These testimonies showed the major impact the church had on their lives, including experiences of visions and messages supposedly from God. Nick used these to control and manipulate them. P.B. Smith's daughter also testified, sharing how she met Nick through her father when she was a teenager. Nick seduced her, and they had sex after Dawn's death. This continued until she moved away about a year later. Doctors and forensic experts also testified, emphasizing that Dawn's body held important clues regarding her death. However, these indicators were ignored, as mentioned earlier, because Nick was a pastor. However, on December 26, 2002, 5 years after Dawn's tragic death, the jury deliberated for a day before returning a guilty verdict on first-degree murder against Nick Hatcheny. At his sentencing hearing on February 7, 2003, Nick addressed the court, which was filled with Dawn's loved ones. He continued to maintain his innocence, but also expressed remorse for his actions and sadness for his family's loss, saying that Dawn deserved better treatment. He was sentenced to life in prison. However, in 2007, an appeal to the state Supreme Court resulted in his life sentence being modified. The appeal argued that, because Dawn died as a result of Nick strangling her, the original charge of aggravated first-degree murder in connection with her death by arson did not match her actual cause of death. The defense argued that Nick therefore did not deserve a life sentence. Ultimately, the state Supreme Court ruled in favor of the appeal, changing Nick's sentence to 26 years in prison. While in prison, Nick was involved in many positive initiatives. He co-founded the Environmental Progress Reentry Network and introduced a waste management system that used vermicompost. Nick could be released from prison soon, as he is eligible for parole in 2025. Sadly, Dawn's life took a tragic turn. She thought she had found the right person, but the reality was very different. This led to a devastating betrayal and her heartbreaking death. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Heidi Firkus. Heidi Firkus was born on December 14, 1984, as the youngest child and only daughter among the 3 children of John and Elinda Erickson. She lived a fulfilling life, known for her cheerful personality and artistic talents. After graduating from high school in 2003, Heidi attended Northwestern University in Roseville. She was a regular at Calvary Chapel, where she had been involved since childhood. At church, Heidi met Nick Firkus. They both became youth group leaders, serving the community with dedication and passion. Nick was born on February 25, 1983, to Julie and Steve Furcus. He is an ambitious and dynamic young man, working as the CEO of a reputable carpet cleaning company. Nick is known for his well-rounded personality and good work ethic. He found his ideal partner in Heidi, whom he met at Calvary Chapel. In 2005, Nick and Heidi, then 22 and 20, were married at the church where their love began. The wedding took place surrounded by family and friends. To outsiders, their marriage seemed perfect. They both loved traveling and cycling, were active in church activities. Heidi began working at her father's financial services company in an administrative role. Their relationship seemed to grow stronger over time. However, their lives were not what they seemed. Little did Heidi know that her life was about to take a turn. On the morning of April 25, 2010, a tragic event occurred in St. Paul, Minnesota. Heidi called 911 to report an intruder in her home. Just 38 seconds into the call, while Heidi was giving her address, she suddenly yelled, "No," and a gunshot rang out. 65 seconds after the first shot, Heidi's husband, Nick, used her phone to contact 911 again. He said in desperation, "Please, someone just broke into my house and shot me and my wife." During the call, Nick sobbed and repeatedly screamed, "Oh Heidi, my wife is dead, please come here." He also screamed, "No," in pain. When police arrived at the scene, they found Heidi lying unconscious in the kitchen with a gunshot wound to her back. Nick was lying next to her on the floor, still talking to 911. He looked very distressed and had a wound to his left leg. Nick told police that one or two intruders had broken into their home. He grabbed a handgun and tried to flee with his wife through the back door, heading towards the garage. However, the intruder grabbed the gun from Nick and shot both of them. Meanwhile, Nick was taken to the emergency room for treatment. There, police questioned him about why he and Heidi left their bedroom, which was supposedly safer, to face potential danger. Nick explained that they were just trying to escape the house through the back door. After being treated for his injuries, Nick was released from the hospital after only 3 hours. Nick was called back to the police station for further questioning about the incident. He recounted in detail what happened. Nick said he remembered that he and Heidi watched a movie and drank alcohol together that night. They went to bed around midnight. Nick said he woke up the next morning, between 6:10 and 6:15, to the sound of the screen door opening and someone trying to unlock the front door. Investigators asked Nick about the door being locked. Nick admitted that he and Heidi usually locked it, but he thought he had forgotten to do so on the night of the incident. Upon hearing the strange noise, Nick said he retrieved the handgun from the upstairs closet. He explained that he had brought it up from the basement a month earlier because it had begun to rust. Initially, the gun was unloaded, but he loaded it when he heard the noise. He then woke Heidi and asked her to call 911. He instructed her to leave the house and go to the garage, where they had parked their car, as part of a safety plan they had agreed upon in case of danger. Although right-handed, Nick held the handgun in his left. He followed behind Heidi, protecting her as they moved towards the garage. Nick said that he and Heidi stopped at the front door to get her purse. Suddenly, the door opened and a man rushed in. The intruder was dark-skinned, about 6 feet 1 inch tall, weighing between 200 and 220 pounds, and wearing a dark-colored hooded sweatshirt with the hood pulled tightly around his face. Nick said the intruder grabbed his handgun. They struggled, and during the scuffle, the gun went off. Nick explained, "My finger accidentally touched the trigger. Heidi was running away, so I may have hit her in the back." Nick recounted the incident that the first shot hit Heidi, causing her to fall immediately. He and the intruder continued to wrestle for the gun. During the struggle, the gun went off again, hitting Nick in the upper thigh. He fell to the ground from his wound. At that point, the intruder escaped through the front door. Nick told investigators that Heidi became unconscious after being shot, and he later lost consciousness due to his wound. Nick told the police that their home was going to be foreclosed on the following day. They planned to inform family and friends of the situation that same day. Nick explained that, due to falling behind on their mortgage payments, their home had been repossessed and sold. Although they had to leave, they hadn't told anyone about it. Their plan was to pack up on Sunday and leave some items in the garage for pickup later on Monday morning. They planned to find temporary accommodation, but life took a different turn. Brendan O'Connor, a neighbor who was cat-sitting at a nearby home, reported to police that he heard an argument followed by gunshots. He also heard someone shouting for help, "You shot her. You shot me. Please, please don't." Although no one saw the intruder flee, Nick provided police with a sketch of the suspect a few weeks later, which was released to the public. Police described the suspect as an unidentified man, 6 feet 1 inch tall, weighing 200 to 220 pounds, and wearing a dark-colored hoodie. About 3 weeks after the murder, the police showed Nick an artist's sketch of the suspect based on his original description. In this updated report, Nick further described the suspect as African American, estimated to be between the ages of 40 and 60. Based on this information, the initial investigation focused on finding the unidentified African American intruder. Police searched the surrounding area extensively, hoping to find evidence or witnesses to corroborate Nick's account. However, the investigation into Heidi's death did not result in any arrests or charges. As a result, the case remained unsolved for many years. More than a decade later, Heidi's murder remains unsolved. Nick appears to have moved on with his life, marrying Rachael and starting a family. However, when financial troubles resurface, Rachael begins to suspect that her husband has hidden secrets. Nick's reluctance to discuss his finances makes Rachael even more curious. She begins to dig deeper and discovers irregularities in Nick's past. These discoveries make Rachael question everything she knows about her husband, including his possible involvement in Heidi's death. Rachael is unaware of the couple's financial troubles, similar to Heidi and Nick's situation years ago. Concerned, Rachael contacts the authorities, bringing attention to the case. Investigators then focus on Rachael Furcus, Nick's second wife since 2012. While speaking to the authorities, Rachael reveals that she divorced Nick in 2019 due to his worsening financial problems. She also recorded an argument with Nick about his affair before their divorce. "He definitely did the same thing he did with Heidi," Rachael told investigators. "I saw a letter warning us that we hadn't paid our property taxes and were at risk of being evicted in 2020 if we didn't pay." When Rachael reported her suspicions to the police, the Heidi murder case was reopened. Sergeant Nicole Sipes of the St. Paul Police Department was assigned to the case. She listened carefully to Rachael's concerns and began reviewing all the evidence. Determined to find the truth, Sergeant Nicole took a bold step. She asked the FBI to help analyze the 911 call recordings. She hoped this would lead to new clues that would shed light on what happened the night of Heidi's murder. After a thorough examination of the recordings, the FBI found no evidence of a third party being involved. This was surprising because it contradicted Heidi's husband's previous statement to the police. Sergeant Nicole and her team were puzzled by this new information. If Heidi and her husband were the only ones in the house, then what exactly happened between them that led to her death? The absence of a third person further raised suspicions about the husband's involvement in the murder. The investigation continued to intensify in order to find the truth. New discoveries by the FBI opened up new lines of inquiry. Sergeant Nicole was more determined than ever to bring justice to Heidi and provide answers to her grieving family. Investigators collected financial documents that contradicted Nick's previous statements, making him the prime suspect in Heidi's murder. Nick's account of the incident kept changing. Initially, he said that the intruder had taken his gun and shot both him and Heidi. He later testified that the intruder did not take the gun, but that he had accidentally pulled the trigger, hitting Heidi in the back. After a thorough investigation, investigators found no signs of a break-in, such as overturned furniture or marks on the walls. The forensic analysis of the scene did not match Nick's account of the incident, especially regarding the direction in which the bullet struck Heidi. Additionally, Heidi did not mention seeing the intruder in the 911 call. The lack of evidence of a break-in made investigators suspicious. They believed it was part of Nick's plan to cover up his role in Heidi's death. As a result, an arrest warrant was issued for Nick on May 19, 2021, more than 10 years after Heidi's death. SWAT arrested Nick at his home in Mounds View. The arrest was the result of Rachael's suspicions and the investigative efforts of Sergeant Nicole Sipes. Many were surprised because the case was thought to be dead. As the trial progresses, the details of the case will be revealed, and the truth about that fateful night will gradually come to light. The big question on everyone's mind is whether Nick was responsible for Heidi's death. After Nick was arrested, Heidi's family said, "We are incredibly grateful to everyone who has worked tirelessly to bring this case to this stage. We also thank everyone who has prayed for and supported us over the years. We hope that these charges will help to clarify the truth and bring justice to Heidi. While we cannot bring Heidi back, we believe she would have wanted us to find the truth. God is glorified by the truth. Heidi's life and memory are further honored by the truth being revealed." The family expressed relief, gratitude, and determination to find the truth. They thanked those who persisted and the community's support, hoping Nick's charges will bring justice. When the case went to trial, Nick maintained his innocence. His family, especially his father, also believed in Nick's innocence. They believed that Nick's deep love for Heidi could not have led him to commit murder. However, the jury had a different view. After 10 hours of deliberating the evidence, on February 10, 2023, they reached a surprising verdict. Nick was convicted of brutal murder. This decision left everyone who knew Heidi stunned and in disbelief, especially since Nick was the person Heidi trusted the most. During the trial, the prosecution detailed the defendant Nick's difficult financial situation. They argued that Nick had kept his financial problems from Heidi and, fearing embarrassment, decided to kill her. The prosecution also questioned Nick's story about the home invasion, arguing that it could have been a cover-up for the crime. Compelling evidence was presented that there were no signs of forced entry into the home, there were many inconsistencies in Nick's testimony, and no DNA or physical evidence of an intruder was found. These factors reinforced the prosecution's argument that Nick was the perpetrator, not an intruder as he claimed. The lack of evidence cast serious doubt on the veracity of Nick's story. At the trial, the prosecutor accused Nick of not wanting to face the truth about his deceitful behavior, leading him to take the extreme step of killing Heidi to protect his reputation. Defense attorney, in contrast, argued that the transition from financial hardship to murder was unreasonable. He also argued that the idea of killing his wife to save his reputation was absurd and had no psychological basis. After a thorough trial and careful consideration of the evidence, the jury unanimously found Nick Ferris guilty of first-degree murder. On April 13, 2023, the judge handed down the harshest sentence possible. Nick would serve life in prison without the possibility of parole. Despite his guilty verdict, Nick Ferris maintained that he had nothing to do with the death of his wife, Heidi. He maintained his innocence, even after his conviction. Currently, Nick is serving a life sentence at the Minnesota Correctional Facility in St. Cloud, Minnesota. However, the motive for the murder remains unclear, leaving us to wonder what drove Nick to commit this regrettable act. However, the investigation revealed that in June 2009, Nick received a foreclosure notice on his home. The house was then auctioned off at a sheriff's auction that same month. About 10 months before Heidi's murder, the eviction process began in February 2010, and a hearing was scheduled for March 8, 2010, which Nick attended alone. The original closing date was April 9, 2010. Nick contacted attorneys, claiming that his grandmother was in the hospital and dying, and asked for the closing date to be moved to April 26. When investigators looked into the matter, they found no evidence that Nick's grandmother was actually in the hospital or had died in 2010. When they asked if Heidi knew about all of this, Nick claimed that Heidi was fully aware of their financial difficulties. He added that they had planned together to leave the foreclosed house and start a new life elsewhere. But the truth is that Nick killed his wife to hide his financial troubles from her. He was too ashamed to admit that he owed $118,000 in credit card debt and was 22 months behind on his mortgage. Although justice has been served, the pain and loss of Heidi's loved ones will remain. No punishment can undo the harm done or bring back the beautiful life she lost so cruelly.